Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. And today I'm talking to Chris Hadnagy, who is the CEO and co-founder of Social Engineer. He's also an author of a number of great books on social engineering, and indeed a podcaster on social-engineer.org and .com. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm really excited to have you on the show. I've followed a lot of your work. You've done, outstanding insights into the whole process of the human connection. We look at technology as security and how do we secure things, and ultimately what it always seems to boil down to is that hackers don't cause breaches, people do. What's been your experience, and how did you get here? What was your sort of journey to this point?
Wow, those are two very separate questions, but an interesting story. So let me start with how I got here. I was the operations manager for a company called Defensive Security, does training and pen testing, mostly network pen testing, exploit writing, things like that. And I became the human guy, the one that always did the human-based attacks and focused on social engineering. From that, I wrote a framework for social engineering when I was preparing to write a course on it, and that became the basis for the website that you mentioned, social-engineer.org. That framework got me a book deal, which I did not accept at first. Kevin Mitnick's publisher had called me and offered for me to write a book, and I was like, no, I'm not an author. Nobody wants to listen to me. And I ended up coming on that and writing that book, which is the first book I ever wrote, Social Engineering, The Art of Human Hacking. And that book led to many organizations calling me and saying, will you consult? Will you help? And that launched my business. So that was 8 years ago that all that occurred, 8 or 9 years ago that all that occurred. And I've been focusing solely on the human element ever since then.
And you say 8 or 9 years, but the history at DEFCON goes further back than that. Is that true?
Yes. So way back, the DEFCON 16 or 17, there was an SE competition there that I had not been running, and I was asked to sit as a judge, and I was literally shocked by what happened there. They were calling random people at colleges, mainly college girls, and they were getting them to give their credit card numbers over the loudspeakers, and there was people in the audience writing these numbers down, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is on the border of like illegal ways of doing this. And I had went to Jeff Moss and said, look, I don't mind being part of an SE competition, but I can't be part of this. I have a business, and I don't want my business to be damaged because, getting arrested for doing something illegal. I have a family and kids to support and all that. So he said, okay, come up with a competition that shows SE and is legal. So I went to the EFF and I asked them if they would represent me as lawyers and helping me go through my ideas that I had and see what was legal and what wasn't. They quickly jumped on with that, and I had two great women that worked with me from the EFF, and I threw out all my ideas to them, said, here's what I'd love to do, here's what I'd love to see, and they came back with what I could and could not do, what was acceptable and not acceptable, and from that was born the Social Engineering CTF, or Capture the Flag, or the SECTF as we call it. And that was DEFCON 18 was the first one that we ever launched. We were given a very small room. It had to be maybe a couple hundred square feet, but we packed it out. It made such huge news that I think to date, I don't know if I'm saying this right or wrong, but I think to date we are the only DEFCON competition that ever has been given a black badge in the first year. Usually they wait a couple of years, but it was such a big deal that we had a black badge for that contest, and now we're going on our 9th year this year of running it, and we have 6,000 square feet this year, so a little bit different from year one.
So fantastic story. It's really interesting to hear that, having been to some of them, to hear what it was like. And you're very rigorous about the approach and education of the audience as well as the contestants. Huge amount of respect for that. But one of the things that's very clear to me is that we humans are the weakest link in security, and what you do in that competition and in a lot of the work that you do is expose that for the purposes of securing it. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and maybe some of the insights that you've developed over the course of time about that human link?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because to me, there's a fine line. Like I hear people in my industry say things like, there's no patch for human stupidity. And I don't like that statement because in essence, what you say, if you agree with that, is that the only reason that there's problems in your organization is because of stupid humans. And I think, honestly, no joke, I can get anyone listening to click on a fish if I know your motivation and if I know the right time and the right emotional content. I've sent 13 million phishing emails in my career, and I wrote 4 books. The 4th one's coming out, and one of them specifically on phishing. And I clicked on an actual real fish. So if a guy who fishes for a living and wrote a book about the psychology of fishing can be fished, I don't believe it's a stupid human problem. So I want to just clarify quickly that one of the things I've learned over the years of doing this, it's not about people being dumb. Now, that doesn't mean people are never dumb. Sure, there are people who really don't care about your organization or don't care about your policies, and those people, I would say, are creating problems because of lack of caring in your organization. But most of the time, humans fall for the same tricks they've been falling for ever since the beginning of humankind because we're human. So if I get the right emotional triggers at the right time with the right emotional content, I can make you do anything I want you to do. So that's the first thing I like to establish, just that baseline. When we talk about humans being the biggest problem, it's that. So I'm not ever suggesting replacing with AI. Now, one of the things that I've also seen through my work and through DEFCON, that generally it's not the human on the phone that's the issue. It's the way they were trained. So I'd like to use this analogy. If you wanted to learn how to fight or box, and you went to a boxing gym, and you walked in and you said to the trainer, "Hey, I want to learn how to box to protect myself," and the trainer put you down in front of a computer and gave you a 20-minute CBT, computer-based training, and then put you in the ring with a heavyweight fighter, you'd be like, whoa, what the heck, man? And he's like, oh, no, I gave you training, right? You're ready to fight. But yeah, that's what we do with our people every day. We put them in front of a 20-minute CBT once a year, and then we send them out in the fishing world with the heavyweights, the guys who are making billions of dollars a year doing this. So we have to change our mentality on how we train people. What you would expect from that boxing coach is that he would take you to the heavy bag and he would show you how to punch. He'd show you the speed bag. He would put gear on you, put you in the ring with someone who doesn't want to kill you, and you would learn how to punch and take a punch. And eventually, when you were ready, then you would be in a real fight, but not until you were ready. And yet we're taking, fishing vendors are constantly selling these things that you've got to just come out and punch your people right in the face, the worst fish you could possibly do, and they're not ready for it. So training becomes a very adversarial thing, or it becomes computer-based, and both of them just don't work. We have to change the ways that we train people to be more, very fitting, incrementally based, to continually improve upon their ability to recognize these types of attacks.
So obviously, I love the fact that you use incremental. That's one of the things that I really focus on. And as you think about some of the steps that you take, obviously you do a lot of this professionally. What are the? Can you give people some sense of the way? I mean, let me declare I've been fished too, and not that I'm anywhere near the expert that you are, but I'm highly alert, but still manage to, and I agree with you 100%. But what are some of the things that people can take away as they think about this through their world of both business but also personal? This isn't just a business or a corporate issue. Some of the steps and things that we can sort of approach this to try and help mitigate some of that attack.
Yeah. So fishers generally rely on emotion. because when we feel emotional, we make decisions based on that emotion and not on logic. There's actually science done by research done by Dr. Daniel Goleman that talks about how the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that processes external stimuli and creates nonverbals and emotional content, it actually can shut down logic centers in our brain. So if I can make you feel afraid or overly excited or overly sad, then I will shut down your brain's ability to make a decision based on logic and reasoning. So phishers know this. So I always tell people, whatever, forget the attack, whether it's phishing, vishing on the phone, or it's in person. If you start feeling emotional when a request is being made, that's a good time to take a 30-second pause. And that 30-second pause will enable your brain to return back to logic center thinking. And just something as simple as a 30-second pause can save a lot of people, because a lot of times what happens is we get an email. So let's say we get an email, we'll use two, corporate email. It says something about a new policy HR is instituting, you know, a new policy HR is instituting, and you're supposed to click on this link to see it, and that policy just irritates you. You look at it and you already have enough to do in your day. You're stressed. You got a million papers piled up on your desk. Your boss is nabbing you for a report, and now you got to worry about a new policy. And your anger at that creates the ability for you to react without thinking. At the same time, a personal email, one that still works today, is you see something like, thank you for your recent order from Walmart or from Amazon. And it has a list of things that you ordered. And you're like, I didn't order anything from Walmart. I didn't order a 57-inch screen TV. And fear takes over. Oh my God, was my credit card hacked? You know, what happened to my account? My Amazon account was hacked. And without opening a browser and going to it, you click the link and you open the link, and it looks like a very real Amazon login page, and you put in your credentials, and some of them, very advanced, actually will take you back to a real Amazon login page, and you're none the wiser that you've just given your credentials to your accounts. These are two examples of how emotions will create an environment where you can make a mistake. So I always tell people, when you start feeling emotional during an email or a phone call, it's a good time to kind of remind yourself that you may be in a situation where you may make the wrong decision.
So great advice. It reminds me a lot of my dad, whose recurring advice historically was, if you feel that mad about writing something, write it down, put it away for 24 hours, and then come back to it. And very similar, and I think, you know, similar kind of reasons. So I think excellent, you know, approach to that. We've seen sort of innovations and new techniques. Does it always get back to that emotional? Is it really just, are we seeing just the same repeating concepts just adapted to what's going on, or are there new techniques, new ways that people are sort of trying to breach our security protocols now?
So yes and no, right? It's the same basic techniques over. If you look at, before there was even email, we had phishing attacks when we had just letters. We had phishing attacks when, you know, if you go back to ancient times and the way that people tried to scam you out of your money. But with that said, something new that was in, I believe, the Verizon DBR report, is we're seeing a huge percentage, I think it's up in the 80s or 90s, of spear phishing emails that are personalized. So they actually have your name, or they have your title, or they have some detail about you, which meant the attacker went and looked you up. They went and looked Nick up, and they found out Nick's family, Nick's hobbies, Nick's work, and they sent you an email about you. Now that is scary, because before it was, hey, we all got the getting free Viagra, or there's a hot Russian woman looking for you, or your classmate wants to hook up with you. And those things worked on a majority of people. You know, when Viagra got big and it was expensive and everybody wanted to try it, all of a sudden Canadian pharmacies were offering it for super cheap. It was a great way for people to get phished and to get credit card data out. And they generally got like some fake sugar blue pills and never did anything, right? It was a classic scam, but it worked. It made them millions and millions of dollars. But now they're devoting some time to finding out about you. And that time should scare the daylight out of every single person listening to this, because that means that they're looking at your social media, they're gathering details about you. And you know what? I've heard this a million times. There's someone listening to this podcast right now, and they're going, no one cares about me. I got like $400 in the bank. What do they care? That's right. They don't care about your $400. They care about your credit rating. They care about your identity. Because while you're working your butt off to keep your family afloat, they're buying a car and a house and a boat in your name, and you don't even know about it until you go to get your next credit card, right? It's tricky because people often minimize their value to an attacker, but those identities go for big money on the internet.
So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Chris Hadnagy. Chris, we were just talking about some of the new spear phishing, so that targeted phishing, and obviously the challenge, thinking logically, or maybe not logically, you'd go, well, I should just remove all my social media and not post anything. Obviously, that's not practical. You've talked about the emotional elements of when things face you in an emotional form. It's more that's the time to take a pause. But are there other things that we can do in our world that help us sort of combat this? Is the advice that you give to your customers? What about your family? I mean, I'm sure you have sort of guidelines that are followed, that not only you follow, but the people around you follow for all that information gathering.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, because I don't really like when I hear people suggest, run to the hills and become a Luddite and don't use social media, because it's not reality. You have kids, I have kids. If you have try telling your teenage daughters that they're not allowed to be on the internet. That you might as well remove limbs, right? So it's not going to happen. So I don't like to tell people don't use social media. But here's a story I kind of tell to help solidify my point. Is when I wrote my first book, I was very paranoid and cautious. So even in my introduction or my dedication, I wrote to my, dedicate this to my wife and children. I didn't put how many kids. I didn't put my wife's name. I didn't put son and daughter. I didn't do any of that. My second book, it just so happened that my daughter met Dr. Ekman when I was working with him on that book, and she has a natural ability with some facial expressions, so she ended up being in the book. Now I couldn't avoid having her name out there. So here has to be my thinking. If my daughter's name is Amaya, that doesn't mean we're friends, because that information is now public because it's in a book. So before, if you knew, in book one, if you knew my daughter's name was Amaya, we probably knew each other. So if you walked up to me at a conference and you said, hey, how's Amaya doing? I'd have to go, hey, how do I know this guy? Because he knows my daughter's name. That's not something that's public anywhere. We must be neighbors, or we must be friends, or he must be friend of a friend. I have to find that out. But now if you know that, that means nothing to me. Everyone on earth can know that because it's public, it's on a book, it's on a website, it's all over the place. So I tell people with social media, you have to realize what is out there about you, that you've put out and that other people have put out. And when you have that realization, you can then say, hey, that information is no longer privileged. So if you have daughters in college or sons in college, and that's public information, well, then if you get an email from the university, you better verify it before you go clicking links or responding to it, because that information may be public knowledge. So it's a thought process more than a technological fix, because there is no technology that can stop you from being phished, right? We just got done working with a big healthcare organization on a phishing project, and they have this SPF thing set up, right? So if the SPF record doesn't match, it rejects the phish. Well, all we did was go and buy a domain that was their name, right? So let's just say company.com, and I bought hr-company.com. I bought the domain. I installed that domain on our phishing server. Now, when the SPF record goes, hey, does this domain actually go to its real thing? Yep, it sure does. And we got through their SPF filters. So we had a high success ratio on that one. So does that fix you? Does that save you from some problems? Yes, but not from all. So you got to have a thought process change when it comes to social media and phishing in order to keep your people safe.
So part of me, as I'm listening to that, thinks maybe I should just behave like I'm a movie star and everybody knows everything about me. And when people come up, I just, there's no way that I'm going to know them, and I shouldn't expect that to be a personal relationship. So I think a great way to sort of approach it. So you mentioned healthcare. Obviously, that's my focus and my passion. I feel like the healthcare industry is behind the curve in terms of addressing this. Yet we have by far and away the biggest target on our back because of the rich nature of the data in the records that they can go after. You've obviously worked with some clients. Tell us a little bit about your experiences and how you've approached that. It's obviously, it's personal because your data's out there. You've probably been breached as a result of some of the healthcare breaches. How do we help people get this in their minds as a priority? It should be number one, right?
Yeah. So this is the hard one, right? Because everything you said is 100% true. Healthcare is so far behind the curve when it comes to this type of training, and it really doesn't make sense to me, considering that they hold the keys to so many kingdoms. You would think that healthcare would take this much more seriously, but the biggest thing that I can say is that the change has to come from the top down. I've worked with some massive healthcare organizations, and I got 2 or 3 guys in the security departments, 2 or 3 guys and gals that really want this change. They've been to the conferences, they've read the books, they want a phishing program, they have the greatest ideas, but somebody up in the C level is not supporting them. And if you don't get support from the CEO down, you're going to fail. That's all there is to it. Because how can you? It's like saying, I'm smoking a cigarette and I'm telling my kids, you better never smoke. Right? It doesn't work, right? If the CEO is not getting phished, if he or she is not part of the program and the training, there's no way you can expect all the people under him or her to really take it seriously. So the change has to come from the top down, first of all. And then secondly, it has to be consistent. I've literally worked with a dozen healthcare companies that when we started off, they wanted to do like 1 phish every 6 months or 1 phish a quarter. Let's use the boxing gym again. Can you go once every 6 months and be a great boxer? Now, I'm not saying you have to do it daily, right? But consistency is the key. To be a good boxer, you'd have to pick a consistent workout schedule. So I need to go 2 or 3 days a week and do this. But phishing, it's a consistent schedule. We say phishing once a month, right? And that will keep your people strong and ready and prepared. Those 2 things alone, like there's so many more other things I can bring up, but those 2 things alone, when companies have implemented them, I've seen unbelievably massive change in the way that they handle phish.
Fantastic advice, and I think important for our listeners to sort of really focus on that, and hopefully some of those senior execs. Unfortunately, we're coming up to the end of time, and I wanted to at least ask you. You mentioned you've got a new book coming out. What's the new book, and any sort of parting thoughts for folks around how they can approach these challenges, maybe in relation to the book, indeed?
Sure. So thanks for that. So my first book, I said, was Social Engineering, the Art of Human Hacking. And there was a bunch of mistakes in that book. Some poor writing. I was very new to the industry, new to writing, new to being an author. And now the last 8 or 9 years have passed from that first book. And I've based a lot of my attacks and research on actual science and scientific studies, not done by me, but done by other people in other industries, and applied them to social engineering. So the new book coming out in July is Social Engineering, the Science of Human Hacking. And it's basically a rewrite of that first book, but done with all the science behind it, done with 8 or 9+ years of experience behind it, and done in a way of helping people become a professional social engineer. So what I mean by that is right now, like you mentioned, we need more testing in this. And everyone who's a pen tester puts a shingle out and says we do SE, but they don't. I talk to so many of them. They do 6 or 7 hours of phishing here or there. They do some phishing emails only if they're doing attacks. But not many people focus on using these as part of a managed service providing program for education. So the book focuses on how to do that, how to become a professional social engineer using the science and the art of social engineering. And then maybe as a final takeaway, in relation to the book is that even though it's geared towards that, I think what CEOs or high level executives in healthcare companies can do is understand that, hey, if this book outlines all the details on how to be a professional SE, that's what they should be looking for when they're trying to pick a partner to help them secure their organization and their people.
Fantastic. So, Chris, it just remains to thank you indeed for joining me on The Incrementalist. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at Dr. Nick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com. And tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.